The amplifier rack serves the purpose of holding our car audio amplifiers, but how can we dress it up with some custom fabrication? That's coming up in this step-by-step video where I'm going to show you how I built these beauty panels, and I'm going to teach you some different router fabrication tricks. Hey Fabrication family, Mark here with CarAudioFabrication, the show where together we learn how to master car audio and how to design, build, and install our dream car audio system. On this channel, I do car audio builds, reviews, and tutorials just like this one, so if you're new here, consider subscribing. Now I also want to mention it's been a while since I've worked on this particular project, so if you want to catch up, you can check out the playlist up here. Let's dive in and start building. So if you've been following along on this video build log series, you'll remember back in video build log number 9 when I made these panels that actually go over the top of the amplifiers. I'm going to be using these panels as a basis to build off of. To get started, I'm going to be making some shoulders that will go right here on the amp rack, and they'll help guide that centerpiece into position and hold it in position. To make these shoulders, I'm going to start with using this template shape that I used to make that curve, and I'm actually going to make 4 of these pieces. So after I've drawn them onto the board, I'm rough cutting them with the jigsaw, and then I'm going to stick a template to the first one. Now I'm going to go on over to my router with my trusty old flush trim bit. And if you're new here, what this basically does is it spins this bit, and this bit has a bearing on top that will copy that template to the lower piece of wood so that we have a perfect cut. I'll be using a router and different router bits often during this video, so if you'd like a complete list of all the different tools and materials used in this project, be sure to check down in the video description. Once I'm done, you can see that the router allowed me to create a perfect curve. Next, I used the double-sided template tape to stick the next piece of wood to this assembly. After doing this 4 times, I have 4 layers of wood that are exactly the same shape. This ultimately will allow me to have perfect symmetry on each side of the amp rack. Now I want these shoulder pieces to appear as if they're coming out of the amp rack. To give this effect, I'll be using this router bit to add shape. Now pay attention here because this is somewhat of an advanced technique. The reason that I actually cut 4 of these pieces when I only need 2 is so that the center 2 pieces can be used as a sacrificial board. This allows me to maximize the cut of the pieces that I will be using so that the edge of those wooden pieces is extra sharp. I load the router bit into the router and then start shaping these pieces. Now notice that I kept all 4 of them stuck together still so that I can keep my fingers a safe distance away from the bit. Safety is important, my dudes, so if you're new to a router, make sure that you do a lot of research so that you're safe. After I've used the router on both sides, my little assembly looks like this, and I want to pause real quick and just say that this is a perfect example of how you can use a few layers of wood and realistically only 2 different router bits to create a very unique piece that you could actually use in an install. So next, I carefully pry this assembly apart into its individual pieces. Here you can see exactly why I had that sacrificial board. Now the point of this slope comes down and meets the surface perfectly. So this piece actually hangs off the ends a little bit. So what I'm doing now is reaching underneath and drawing a little line. Next, I carefully rough cut this away, saving a little bit of material. I then apply template tape to each end of the piece and then stick it in position. Now remember the 2 sacrificial leftover pieces that I had earlier? I'm going to use those now and stick this to the workpiece as well. This allows me to take this whole assembly, flip it over on the router table, and now I can flush trim the pieces that I made to the outside profile. Oh yeah. So here you can see our shoulder piece is now cut to the same profile. To permanently attach this piece to the baseboard, I'm using wood glue, and to basically clamp it in position while the wood glue dries, I'm using some CA glue. With the pieces back into the car, I can now test fit my centerpiece just to make sure everything's still good to go. Next it's time to make the centerpiece, which will have the holes in it for the amplifiers. There's going to be a lot of really cool router tricks in this. So I've started with carefully measuring out the layout. Now it's critical that these holes for the amplifiers are aligned perfectly with the actual logos on the amplifiers. These templates that I'm using are from my show sponsor Mobile Solutions, and what's cool about them is they actually have these little grid marks on them which allow you to line up perfectly on center. Now that I have the position marked out, I'm going to stick these templates to the piece of wood, and I want to point out that I'm using only 1/8 inch thick wood right now. Since this wood's so thin, you don't have to rough cut it, but you should rough rough cut it if you're working with really thick wood. Oh crap, you guys are gonna have a field day down in the comments. The point is, since I'm using such thin wood, I can get away with just using a spiral trim bit and not having to bother with using the jigsaw first. When I get to the end of the cut, I'm careful that I make sure that I pull away that centerpiece away from the bit and that I firmly hold both workpieces in position until the bit comes to a complete stop. So let's do a quick test fit just to make sure everything lines up, and we can see that it does. So now I start to plan out the rest of my different templates that will sit on top of this piece. Before I start making those accent pieces though, I'm going to start with copying my thin template to a thicker piece of wood that ultimately will be used in the vehicle. This is done by tracing the shape, applying a bunch of template tape, sticking the two together, rough cutting, and then flush cutting on the router. Here's our nice copied piece. Now let's get started on making the accent pieces. The first pieces that I'm going to make are the pieces that actually go around the amplifier hole. These will be wrapped in the lighter color gray vinyl that you see elsewhere on my build. To create the larger shape that will go around these pieces, I'm going to go back to using my original template. I start with tracing the outside of these, which will serve as the outside of that shape. To make the transition between those two shapes, I'll be using this arc. I then stick the shapes onto my template piece. Now what I did off camera is I drilled a small hole that allowed me to start the router bit, and then you can see that I only copied the parts of the shape that I intend to use. I can then stick the arc into position, and over at the router I use the same process to connect my two previous cuts. I've now cut out this complete shape. Now if you remember earlier, I cut out two different accent pieces that will go around the hole. In order for those accent pieces to fit within this piece, I'll use these particular shapes to actually cut out the hole so that it's a little bit larger for those accent pieces. Now the holes are enlarged, but my template piece here is only made out of 1/8 inch thick wood, so I need to transfer it to a piece of 1/2 inch thick wood. This process is similar to before, but with a twist. On the outside of the shape, I'm doing just like I did before, and I'm using a flush trim bit to make an exact copy. But on the inside of the shape, I'm actually going to shrink the hole just slightly, and the reason for that is right now my gap is 3/16 of an inch from the outside of the inner template to the inside of this template. That 3/16 inch gap would be great if I was wrapping both of those pieces in carpet, but since I'm wrapping them in vinyl and vinyl's thinner, I actually need to shrink that gap down. Using this router bit with a slightly oversized bearing, you can see that the hole is actually shrunk just a little bit. Now I still have another piece to make, and this is where one of my favorite router techniques comes into play. Remember this thin piece of wood that I had earlier? It's what I got my shape out of from the inside. I'm going to be using it to make an outer trim ring. It will be going around this piece that we just finished earlier. I start with flush trim copying the inside profile. I then remove the template shape. Next, I'm using the Smart Pattern system from Mobile Solutions. This kit has a huge rabbiting bit that I'll be using for the first step of the process. I've adjusted the bit so that it's raised 1/4 of an inch out of the top of the table, and I forgot to tell you, but I'm actually using 3/4 inch thick wood. Once we flip the piece over, you can see that it makes this large step that looks like this. Next, we grab a 1/4 inch drill bit from the kit and we make this hole here. Now I'm going to load up the 1/4 inch spiral flush trim bit. With the router powered off, I push the bit through the hole and adjust its height so that the bearings will ride against this edge. I then power up and proceed to make my cutting pass, and it's important that I make sure that I'm always applying pressure towards the bearings of the bit. I'm going to speed things up now, but you can see by doing this process, I've made this piece that will actually be the outer trim ring. When I'm done, I'll have this little nub, but I can just sand that away. So I've got my other pieces in place, and now I can add the trim ring, and you can get an idea of what this is going to look like once it's done. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe so that you're notified when I make another. In the next video, I'll be taking these wood pieces that I just created in this video, and I'll be doing some of the different edge profiling and shaping these pieces so they really flow with the install. As always, thanks to all you guys for watching. It really means a lot to me that you dudes are out there watching these videos. I also want to drop a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. These guys help me afford what I need to make this content. Thanks to those guys, I was able to pick up this new wireless microphone system where I'm actually able to be anywhere in the shop without having any wires attached to me, and the microphone's right here and you can hear me just perfectly. So if you're one of my dudes out there that's always watching these videos and really enjoys them, I'd I'd appreciate if you could just take a quick second and check that out down below. It's a great way for us to interact even more, and you get cool perks like seeing the videos early and even having your name listed in the credits or mentioned. So a special thanks goes out to Eddie, Brian, Ali, Eric, Finchie, EJ, Emmanuel, Rory, Truman, Jerry, and the rest of the Patreon support team. Thank you guys. I really appreciate your support. To everyone else out there, thank you again for watching.